When most people remember episode 6 of Band of Brothers, they remember the quiet, heartbreaking relationship between Easy Company medic Eugene Doc Rowe and the Belgian nurse Renée Lemaire, portrayed by Lucy Jane. The series presents the two as forming a close bond during the siege of Bastogne. While it makes for a touching story, historians believe the two likely never actually met. Renée was working at a different aid station from the one serving the airborne troops, and in the diary she kept throughout the battle, Eugene Rowe's name never appears. Even so, that doesn't diminish Renée's courage. If anything, her real story is just as remarkable as the fictionalized version. Alongside the soldiers fighting in the frozen forests around Bastogne were civilians who willingly placed themselves in extraordinary danger to care for the wounded. Renée Lemaire was one of them. Another woman portrayed in the series is the young nurse known as Anna. Her real name was Augusta Chiwy, one of several historical details that author Stephen Ambrose altered in his account. Augusta was born in 1921 in the Belgian Congo to a Belgian veterinarian and his Congolese wife. When she was 9 years old, her family returned to Bastogne where she grew up. In 1940, at the age of 19, she left for Leuven to begin training as a nurse. 4 years later, she came home for what was supposed to be a simple Christmas visit with her family. On December 16, 1944, the very day she arrived, Adolf Hitler launched his massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes. Within hours, the peaceful holiday she had expected had become one of the largest and bloodiest battles fought on the Western Front. Renée Lemaire's life had followed a different path. Born in Bastogne in 1914, she grew up above her parents' hardware store in the town square before eventually moving to Brussels, where she worked as a qualified nurse during the war. Like Augusta, she returned to Bastogne in December 1944 to spend Christmas with her parents, never imagining that she would soon be trapped inside a city under siege. The situation deteriorated rapidly. On the 19th of December, soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division reached Bastogne to reinforce its defenses. That same day, the field hospital operated by the 326th Medical Company was overrun by elements of the German 116th Panzer Division. Numerous American medics and nurses were either killed during the fighting or executed after being captured. By the 21st of December, German forces had completely surrounded Bastogne. Escape was impossible. Renée could no longer return to Brussels, and the American medical services were desperately short of trained personnel. Faced with overwhelming numbers of wounded and too few doctors and nurses to care for them, the U.S. Army began recruiting local civilians. Renée did not hesitate. She volunteered her services immediately. Augusta Chiwy joined her, and together they began treating wounded American soldiers at the aid station serving the 20th Armored Infantry Battalion of Combat Command B, 10th Armored Division. The aid station itself had already been forced to relocate several times as German pressure intensified. It moved first from Noville, then to Rue du Vivier, before finally settling in a building on Rue de Neufchâteau. Conditions were primitive, medical supplies were limited, food was scarce, and casualties arrived around the clock. Despite the exhaustion, both women worked continuously, tending to the wounded with remarkable dedication. For several days, low cloud and thick fog had protected Bastogne from German aircraft. That changed on the 23rd of December when the skies finally cleared. Almost immediately, German artillery increased its bombardment, while Luftwaffe bombers began attacking the town from the air. For 3 consecutive days, Bastogne endured relentless shelling and bombing. Christmas Eve brought the worst of it. Throughout the 24th of December, explosions echoed across the town as artillery rained down on the defenders. Earlier that day, General Anthony McAuliffe issued his famous Christmas message to the troops. He reminded them that although they were cold, hungry, surrounded, and far from home, they had already stopped 4 German panzer divisions, 2 infantry divisions, and a parachute division. Their sacrifice, he wrote, was giving their loved ones back home a Merry Christmas, and they could all take pride in being part of such a gallant achievement. That evening, Captain Jack T. Pryor, battalion surgeon for the 20th Armored Infantry Battalion, was preparing to visit one of his dying patients. A young lieutenant with a severe chest wound wanted to send one final letter to his wife, and Pryor intended to write it for him. Just before leaving, one of his men reminded him that it was Christmas Eve and suggested they at least mark the occasion with a bottle of champagne. The room had been carefully blacked out against enemy aircraft, and the two men had only just filled their cups when everything suddenly changed. Without warning, the darkness was replaced by an intense flash of white light. Pryor later wrote that the room became as bright as an arc welder's torch. Seconds later came the terrifying scream of a falling bomb, the first he had ever heard. Like every soldier who has experienced an air raid, he was convinced it was coming directly for him. The explosion was devastating. The building next door, which housed the aid station and its patients, was struck by a direct hit. Pryor rushed outside to find that the 3-story apartments serving as his hospital had been reduced to a burning mountain of rubble nearly 2 meters high. German aircraft had dropped magnesium flares overhead, illuminating the destruction so brightly that night seemed to turn into day. Ignoring the danger, Pryor and his medical staff climbed onto the burning debris, throwing aside flaming timbers as they searched desperately for survivors. From beneath the wreckage came the cries of wounded men trapped below. Then the attacking aircraft returned. Spotting the rescue effort beneath him, the German pilot swooped low and strafed the area with machine gun fire. Pryor and his men dived beneath nearby vehicles for cover as the aircraft made repeated passes before finally departing. Nearby buildings had also been hit, including the battalion headquarters, which was now ablaze. More soldiers arrived to assist with the rescue, and together they located a cellar window, identified by the white directional arrows commonly painted on European buildings. Volunteers were lowered into the smoke-filled basement on ropes, managing to pull out 2 or 3 injured men before the weakened structure collapsed completely into the cellar below. Pryor estimated that roughly 20 wounded soldiers died in the bombing. Among them was Renée Lemaire. He believed she had been working in the kitchen when the bomb struck. Whether she ran into the cellar herself or was pushed there in the chaos was never known. Ironically, many of those still inside the kitchen survived because one entire wall consisted of glass. The force of the blast threw them outside rather than burying them beneath the collapsing building. Those patients who remained alive were evacuated to the Airborne Division's Riding Hall Hospital. Yet even that terrible night was not over. Around 2 o'clock on Christmas morning, the German bomber returned and destroyed a vacant building standing beside the already smoldering ruins of the hospital. For years afterward, Captain Pryor wondered why the hospital had been targeted. There were no Red Cross markings visible from the air. Some joked that the bomb must have come down the chimney. Pryor believed the more likely explanation was that numerous American tanks and half-tracks had been parked bumper to bumper outside the building, making the area an obvious military target. Before leaving Bastogne, Pryor supervised the grim task of recovering and identifying the dead. Renée Lemaire's body was eventually found beneath the rubble. In one final act of respect, he personally returned her remains to her parents, wrapped in the white parachute silk that she had admired so much during the battle. Deeply moved by her sacrifice, Pryor wrote a formal recommendation asking that Renée receive the highest award possible. In his citation, he described how she had volunteered on the 21st of December while the aid station cared for around 150 wounded men trapped inside the encircled town. Despite constant danger, inadequate food, and almost no opportunity for rest, she tirelessly dressed wounds, administered medication, assisted with plasma transfusions, fed patients unable to feed themselves, washed them, comforted them, and lifted the spirits of men who had nearly lost hope. Pryor wrote that her presence alone inspired the wounded. He concluded that although she was not an American soldier, her contribution to their survival had been invaluable and worthy of the highest recognition the United States could bestow. Sadly, his recommendation appears never to have been acted upon by the commanding general who received it. As a result, Renée Lemaire's extraordinary service went largely unrecognized for decades. It was not until December 10, 2010, 66 years after her death, that Belgium finally honored her by posthumously appointing her a Knight of the Order of the Crown. Despite Captain Pryor's passionate recommendation, she appears never to have received official recognition from the United States government. Augusta Chiwy, who survived the bombing that claimed her friend's life, also waited many years before receiving widespread recognition. In March 2012, the United States honored her with an award for valor, and Belgium later knighted her for her wartime service. She lived to the age of 94 before passing away in 2015. The soldiers who defended Bastogne have rightly earned their place in history, but they did not stand alone. Among the frozen streets and shattered buildings were civilians who chose to remain beside the wounded when they could have sought safety elsewhere. Renée Lemaire and Augusta Chiwy never carried rifles or stormed enemy positions, yet their courage under fire matched that of the men they cared for. Their battlefield was the hospital ward, and every life they saved came at tremendous personal risk. Renée ultimately gave her own life while tending to others, a sacrifice that deserves to be remembered alongside the heroes whose stories have become famous. If you have a thought concerning Renée Lemaire or Augusta Chiwy, drop a comment below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe.